Welcome back to the Business Immigration Benchmark. I'm your host, Laura Bonairs, and back with me today is my friend, colleague, and practically co-host here, Sydney Stewart, back from her wedding, honeymoon, and here to talk all things Q3 immigration benchmarking. And this is a global mobility program management survey. Sydney, welcome back. Tell us what to expect high level from your Q3 benchmarking survey you're currently still fielding.
Thanks so much for having me, Laura. So, we kicked off the survey Friday, July 11th, and it closes on Friday, August 15th. Responses are rolling in. So far, we have 27 responses. The survey covers a few different topics this round, so directly related to program management, like Laura said, but it goes over program ownership. So, where does mobility sit within, the broader organization? Resourcing and operational models. So, diving into team structure, use of external support, how are teams thinking ahead there? Technology. So, I wanted to really see how many systems are teams using. Is your technology integrated into HRIS systems? What does that look like? And then lastly, policy and relocation. So this survey is a little different. We included some relocation questions in terms of vendor partnerships with relocation management companies, tax services, etc. And yeah, happy to dive into the data further with you.
Amazing. I'm so excited. And one thing I want to mention here is the community that Sydney's building is really grassroots. These are real global mobility leaders with large programs. I think the average program size of foreign nationals under management right now is around 320 foreign nationals under management. The range is like 212 to 918. So, all shapes and sizes. And these are real people, real global mobility leaders completing the survey, really engaged in your community. I know you've been running virtual roundtables as well as in person roundtables coming to a city near you. Stay tuned for Sydney's appearance and invites. But yeah, that these surveys that the community members are participating in kind of fuel those conversations. And what's really exciting now is that we're running year over year surveys. So when you mentioned trends, we're picking up some really exciting year over year trends of like how many foreign nationals per global mobility leader per program. So these are things that when we're delivering these results in mid-August that folks can expect to see by participating. So if you haven't already, we'll drop a link here in the show notes to join Sydney's community. You have to be a global mobility leader in-house, and then you can participate in these surveys, get results, and have conversations with your peers. So that's my plug. Was that good? Did I cover it?
That's great. Yeah, the plug's awesome. We'll have upcoming roundtables in August and beyond, and I'm really looking forward to our in-person roundtables. The first one is in Seattle on September 4th. Then we're heading to Palo Alto on September 11th, and then Boston on September 17th. And then Laura and I will both be in Chicago on October 2nd. So there's lots of good things in the works. So please reach out to me if you're interested in attending. We'd love to have you there.
Yeah, and this survey will be part of those conversations as well as the library you're building of other surveys. And one thing that's really cool about the roundtables, whether virtual or in person, is that the peers, the community members are really leading that and benchmarking with each other and kind of providing the qualitative data behind the quantitative data that you're presenting. So I'm there and I'm really a listener and I gain a lot of knowledge from just what programs are doing, how they're doing it, and kind of taking a consensus. So I'm not lecturing basically. It's very cool. Cindy makes my job easy by having all these interesting voices and perspectives in the room. But let's dive into the survey. Right now, we're kind of seeing some early results. We've got 27 respondents, and it sounds like the program size when we were prepping is between 212 foreign nationals to up to 918 foreign nationals under program management. Can you tell us a little bit about staffing? So I know some programs use consultants, some do full time. What are we seeing from those results of what's the makeup of global mobility teams?
Yeah, so I thought this was really interesting and something I'm always curious about. So, based on the data so far, 95% of teams are entirely staffed with full time employees. This means only 5% are staffed with contractors or external consultants. So, thinking about bringing someone in for a busy H-1B season, helping with batch perm, whatever that is. But 95% are staffed in-house, which tells me from the data that, people rely on their internal knowledge, right, for their teams and, the mobility programs, although they maybe sometimes would love to bring on an external consultant, right, Laura? But maybe budget's tight. Maybe there's outlying questions there of why teams can't, but it seems to be running smoothly internally. So maybe they don't need it.
Yeah, amazing. It's funny because I've seen some recent postings for consultants. That must be an outlier, or maybe we'll see that in a 2026 trend. One thing I'm always interested in understanding is where does the global mobility team sit within the organization? Sometimes the global mobility is under legal, sometimes it's aligned with HR. I think that's probably the majority of how I experience my, day-to-day contacts at the clients is within HR. And so how's that showing up in the program management survey? Where are we seeing global mobility sit within an organization?
Yeah, so it's a great question because in a few of our virtual roundtables too, just to provide some context and why I included this question, is that sometimes there's communication issues, right? I don't even want to say issues, but sometimes it's hard to communicate depending on where your mobility program is sitting. But from our survey, 74% of teams closely align with human resources. I asked the question to really learn more about which departments teams are aligned with because in a few of our virtual roundtables, some folks had said they sit with total rewards and some said they sit with legal. And it could lead to communication issues if you know who's communicating what. Maybe it's a budget ask too. Like, where does your budget come from? Does it come from human resources? Does it come from legal? So it was interesting to see that 74% of teams do align with human resources.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I see when teams fall under legal, there's a different communication strategy and how it's reviewed and what's being communicated. I think when immigration or global mobility sits under HR, there's a different approach and maybe volume of communication or how the communication's reviewed. I think, there's benefits and challenges with either. When it's in legal, I will say that, especially under this administration, the issues are getting raised very quickly within the organization. HR, I think generally it's a little bit more of a challenge to get legal's attention because it's not necessarily always front and center in their priority list. So the benefit is when we're having a lot of compliance challenges, a compliance priority, when it's under legal, that gets expedited. So just, some things to think about. And that if you are under HR, especially under this compliance and enforcement cycle within US immigration specifically, and actually global for that matter, making sure you have a strong partnership with legal is gonna be very important because, again, compliance is very much being tested. So just some thoughts as the majority tends to sit in HR as we're finding out in this program management survey. Sydney, tell us more about what functions global mobility leaders are performing within their roles as we're finding out in this survey. What is it looking like from the early results?
Let's see. So 100% of teams say that immigration falls within the global mobility function, which makes sense to me, right? Immigration's a huge part of it. Relocation sat at 89%. Tax and payroll coordination, 53%. So it's a heavy drop there. Maybe tax is separated amongst teams, is what it's looking like. Business travel compliance, 47%. So maybe having a separate travel team in which could lead to, extra communication steps to make sure your team is compliant. And then lastly, assignment planning and policy is 79%. So it's good to see the higher number there.
So it sounds like within the global mobility function, immigration's almost always under their purview. The next most common is relocation, which that makes sense. It's like you're getting the visa and then moving them and implementing that. And that often seems like the natural pairs. And then, yeah, the assignment planning and policy, that also makes sense to sit within global mobility because they're seeing what issues are popping up and working within the business leaders. The one that I thought which was surprisingly low is that business travel compliance, and I wanna dig into this more because as more countries are putting more restrictions in how business travel is permitted or not permitted anymore, I wonder if this is gonna be putting some pressure on global mobility leaders to step in more. I also think it's kinda hard, and we were talking with some community members about just the need for global mobility leadership in this area because when it's fallen under procurement, it doesn't necessarily have the compliance lens that's needed these days. So I think more to come on that. A lot of good conversations to have. So, one thing I hear from my clients, and I'm sure the community members are talking about, is how they're at capacity. And so, one thing to think about, and what we asked in this survey was, how do teams get more resources? So, tell us a little bit about what the survey is trending here.
I think this is a hard one, Laura. So, assessing whether you need a new head count, I think teams, yeah, they're at capacity and it's hard to go to leadership. You need data, right, to back it up. I've seen from the survey so far, 42% is based on volume thresholds and 32% is business case development. This really tells me that teams are just under resourced relative to program complexity and rely heavily on justifying growth via data. And it's almost, is it more of a reactive need, right? As volume increases, we need to hire more team members, otherwise, just relying on business case development versus, I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is always how much time it takes to support each, employee. And I think like HR, the numbers are often guided based on like total number of employees at the company. And then there's guidelines of how much HR support or HR personnel for, recommended ratios based on, issues that normal employees have that HR helps support them. I think foreign nationals under management is probably viewed very similarly. And what our survey is hoping to do is kind of influence how this is managed and like what is a reasonable or average number of foreign nationals per global mobility leader. So that's gonna be, like, kind of the breakout trend that will have, like, year-over-year data out of your survey. Last year, I think it was for every 1 global mobility leader, we saw 148 foreign nationals under management. Whether that's right or not, like, that's what the data is sort of proving out. So if you are a one-woman show and you're managing 300, you know that, like, wow, you're sort of not in line with the averages that we saw last year, and then this year will sort of show if that's trending more cases or more foreign nationals under management or fewer. One thing I can say is that per foreign national, there are more challenges. So per foreign national, it's requiring the global mobility leader and counsel more time because the cases are more complex. The compliance is more closely scrutinized. So if we thought that last year, one global mobility leader for every 148 foreign nationals was the right one. I think that same global mobility leader, even with the same case count, is gonna feel, oh, way over capacity because there's just, like, more handholding involved, more questions per case. Like, every time someone travels, they're bringing questions as we are recommended that they do, but that's just a lot of emails, that's a lot of phone calls for everyone involved with perhaps even just the same number headcount. So, I think that's coming up in the qualitative conversations that we're having, so it'll be really cool to see how your survey illuminates whether we're seeing teams have fewer foreign nationals under management per person or if we're seeing that number go up. Because I could also see, because of budget constraints and cost cutting, that companies are requiring global mobility do more. So,
Right.
we'll see.
Yeah, there's just so much to keep up with. And one of our virtual roundtables, a member was raising the idea of there's just so much going on. How do you even keep track of it?
Right.
Like what headlines like do you teams need to be concerned with? So partnering with legal counsel, they can help disseminate that information and help you kind of get to know what's happening a little bit better and provide recommendations for you. But you're right, exactly right, Laura. There's just balancing your day-to-day work with everything that's going on in the current environment's tough.
So, switching gears a little bit to technology, we understand our global mobility leaders are using HR systems. They may be using a immigration platform to communicate and see what Counsel is doing. There might be other ones depending on if they're also responsible for relocation, policy management, or tax. So, on average, how many platforms is, the global mobility leaders logging into? What does the survey say here?
Yeah, so I was expecting this to be different, right? The data right now is saying that 37% of teams use one case management system and HRIS system, which to me would lead me to think that they're integrated, right? And then 42% of teams use two. But what I found even more shocking was that 84% of teams said that their HRIS system isn't integrated with their case management platform. So I think that's a huge unlock there that
Yeah.
teens could look into.
Yeah, room for opportunity there. I think it's interesting working with some companies that are growing, spinning off, managing their HR data has been really thorny. And what's tough is that depending again where global mobility sits, they may or may not have influence in how the HR system is implemented or managed. So there's a couple organizations I'm currently working with that the HR data is pretty rough. And again, they've had a lot of M&A activity and some movement within the organization and actually reorganization with HR. And this in this instance, global mobility sits in legal. So they don't really have an influence or a strong leverage to sort of manage or change how the HR data is collected. And that's been a real problem in how we're able to have reliable data. So they're really relying on us as counsel to sort of make sure that the immigration data is clean and up to date, but this survey is interesting in showing that there are multiple systems and a lot of room for opportunity to integrate. And most, if not all, immigration or like law firm case management has the ability to integrate, and that would just save people a lot of time. I hope that that 37% that's logging into one system is the integrated system and their life must be
Right.
a little better than everyone else's.
Exactly. Because I was expecting teams to have like 3 to 5 systems, right, depending on how many vendors you have. So I'm curious as more responses roll in if that number will change, which I'm assuming and predicting it might.
Yeah, and speaking of, multiple systems, multiple vendors, it looks like the early results are showing that organizations do leverage multiple law firms, and that might be because of, global programs and needing preferred vendors in certain jurisdictions, or running a multi-vendor approach because the program is large and that's the best way to make sure service level agreements are met and things like that. Any, I don't know, takeaways from multi-vendor approaches.
I think this makes sense, right? So if you have a tax vendor here, but I guess this is separate. This is an immigration
Yeah.
specific question. But no, to your point, the global immigration versus US immigration and the multiple jurisdictions. I've also heard of some teams, so they have a main immigration counsel, right? But maybe sometimes they use a different immigration counsel for more personal cases, right? So maybe that there's a gray area where the employer to employee relationship might get a little foggy. So you pull in a different external counsel to deal with issues that HR doesn't want to be involved with. So that could be another option that I've heard of.
Yeah, and just the data is sort of showing that, like, how many, immigration vendors or law firms does your company currently work with? And it's like 1, 37%, 2, 26%, 3 plus 37%. So it's really kinda split. There's no clear majority here of how organizations are working with immigration counsel. And again, the way the question is written is, from a global perspective. So it could mean that organizations are engaging multiple vendors to manage their US and global immigration programs. Any other, results you're excited to see? Any initial feedback or, comments you're receiving from the survey, from the respondents?
Yeah, in terms of any other qualitative data, people are excited for this survey, which made me excited. So it's a timely survey, which with, increased USCIS costs, everything going on with the current administration. So figuring out budget, head count, these are important things that teams are focusing on right now. But again, I'm always open ears of what's top of mind for global mobility folks. I know another hot topic is green card sponsorship. So I think that will be another good topic for maybe Q4 that we can focus on. So there's just a lot going on in the space. So it's hard to choose a topic that, is the best. But I think this one's a good one. And again, these are early results. And as we get more results, the data will fluctuate. So happy to chat with you again, Laura, as we see more
Yeah,
results coming in.
as we get the final ones. Yeah, the thing I think I'm the most
Yeah.
excited about is, per global mobility leader, how many foreign nationals are under management because we measured this last year and I'm curious to see what the trend line looks like. I mean, with only two sort of 2024 Q3 data, we'll have Q3 2025 data. But it's cool. Sydney's creating these trends. And so if you want to understand where your program fits, if you're managing a tremendous amount of volume, you wanna see where that fits within the industry, like, this is the only survey currently that's measuring these things and has the year-over-year data for it, so that's my summary plug. I'm excited for that data piece. And it is something that I've helped to use help support my clients that when, they're splitting roles and the immigration piece is taking more and more of their time, it's helped justify more resources or justify their capacity in how they're spending their time because we have this industry benchmark. So it's really cool. You're fielding the survey through mid-August. It's open through August 15th. Check in with Sydney. If you're not already a community member, join. It gives you the insights to your peers, to the industry benchmarks. The surveys take what you said, 8 minutes to complete?
8 minutes. I've seen it take as little as 4 minutes,
Okay.
so yeah, it's super quick.
But the data is really meaningful. And as you participate, you get invited to these peer roundtables where, again, you're hearing from your peers. The data always remains in the aggregate. We never disclose what your answers are to anyone. It's all anonymized as it's aggregated within these surveys. Anything else I'm missing from as far as why someone might want to participate as a global mobility leader? I hope I got it all, but there's certainly more. And the camaraderie, of
Yeah.
course.
Only thing I'll add, so yeah, our virtual roundtables are completely off the record, similar to our in-person roundtables. Everything is off the record. We keep everything confidential. The purpose of it is to help you. So as an immigration professional, it's tough. It's tough out there. I understand that. I appreciate that. So feel free to reach out, with any questions regarding to the data. I'm always happy to help. And then one last plug before Laura lets me go. I will be sending detailed benchmarking reports as well after you complete the survey. So that's something concrete that you can bring back to your team to make those strategic decisions. So yeah, thanks so much for having me, Laura. It's been a pleasure as always. And yeah, look forward to talking again soon.
Amazing. Sydney, thanks for the sneak peek for this year's Q3 2025 Immigration Program Management Benchmarking Survey. More to come here on the Business Immigration Benchmark. Catch you next time.